My name is Bouffard. I'm a guitarist, composer and sound artist, and I've been developing a piece called Vengeful Ghost at Snape, which is an immersive piece for electric guitars based on a concept of fractured punk, which means it's using the sound and energy of punk but dismantled, broken, reformed and performed in an immersive space, a surround space that an audience can pass through. It intersects performance with sound sculpture and sound art. The idea came from a number of places. It was partly inspired by artists like Glenn Branca from the sort of early 80s, around the sort of no-wave era, where they were fusing sort of the energy of punk with abstract jazz, you know, really kind of breaking things down. Sounds which were very angular and aggressive and confrontational, but not following kind of typical rules. Also, more recent artists like Janet Cardiff, who has created pieces with multiple speakers, up to 100 speakers in large spaces, that allow the audience, that give the audience agency to kind of walk around in the space. And also coming from my own relationship with electric guitars, from a rock and roll background, where I feel it's an instrument. It's connected very much with people who are self-taught. It has a lot to do with agency and DIY. The nature of the project is that it needs to be tested for real. You can't, it's not something that can just be theorized or written on paper. You know, you have to be in a space working with musicians to do it at all. While we were here, we were really surprised how elements of the environment seeped into our consciousness as we were doing it. You know, references of maritime kind of metaphors and imagery and ways of referencing the ideas we were doing just seemed to kind of creep in. And I think it was something to do with the landscape around here, the closeness to the sea, something about the elements, essentially, and kind of the roughness of the landscape definitely started to inform the work. First of all, the work itself, you know, it's not based on tonality and structure. You know, it's based on, or at least not structure in the sense of linear structures. It's based on the sense of organisation and disorganisation, and the sounds we use are essentially gestures. So we're trying to avoid kind of traditional methods of approaching writing music. So it's informed partly by sound art. It's also affected by the fact that the people I've chosen aren't typical musicians. We have a visual artist, we have someone who's more of a percussionist and singer, myself, and we also use spatialization and exploring ways of using computer systems for distributing sound creatively. It's also about forces, oppositions of forces, whether they're sonic, whether they're structural, architectural, if they're landscape, if they're to do with the way people relate to each other. It's a piece which isn't meant to be experienced in the sense of a linear piece of music. It's abstract and supposed to be experienced in the way you would experience an abstract sculpture, for instance. When we walked into the derelict area, it kind of took our breath away a little bit. It's kind of crumbling, sort of decaying beauty, and it's also a space which is obviously, by virtue of its kind of sort of semi-disintegration, is a work in progress of its own. it's somewhere like this. This is a performance space, which is it's perfect. It's kind of been it is as it's intended to be. In a space like the derelict area, it becomes another collaborator in a way in the performance. You're working with a space which has its own movement. Also, once we were in there, a lot of it really kind of fired our imaginations. So, for instance, we had the idea of kind of miniature solo performances in it. So you see like Ali dragging the guitar around, or Lewis doing a vignette of his own with the pedals on the ground. This was all kind of inspired by being in the space. Ideally, I would like to take it to different locations, around the world, working in, adapting it on each occasion to different physical environments. Whether they're buildings, it could be a brutalist car park, something like that. It could be a beach, But in each of these cases, is meant to be tried out in different locations, because the locations are so important to it. That's something which became more and more apparent over the course of this residency. It was just how important the physical environment was to the project. Another area of it which really interests me is because essentially it's not reliant on any kind of degree of technical virtuosity. So I kind of would hope that it might be a project which can be inspiring to other people, because it's an example of kind of artistic expression without needing any kind of great degree of virtuosity or education involved in it. It's instinctive. That, for me, is where the power of it is. So in a way, we have this still perimeter of speakers, and this ability for the sound to kind of travel any way it's made to. Even generative elements, which is something we're also working on, programming elements of Max MSP, how that side can be more developed. one of the ideas we had in the derelict space was the guitar drag, which Ali was doing a kind of improvised solo performance where she's, dragging electric guitar around the concrete and kind of performing musically, as in she's making judgments of gesture. She's making gesture, but with the guitar. So she's using the space and she's using the sound, and there's a cross between her agency and the limited control you can have of dragging an electric guitar on concrete. And there's this huge sound. So she's also playing with the spatial diffusion. So there's another member of the team who's operating, moving the sounds around the space, kind of across it, around it. So this is another part of it. This is the kind of sculptural side of the piece. What we've been creating here is almost like a code. It's something which we can sort of replicate and vary. It can mutate in many ways. And that's always kind of been the intention, that it's not something which is fixed. It's going to be, it can morph. I'm interested in the third result of putting elements together and just seeing what happens when you light the chemicals. So yeah, Leah, we switch to